Good morning. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning.
Good
Yeah.
morning.
I'd like to begin. Just would you please introduce yourselves and give us a brief background for the cameras as to who you are and what your role was in the music history?
Well, I'm Uvee Hayes. I have 65 years in the broadcast and media industry. Former disc jockey, program director, music director, Air Force veteran, and currently I have a television program. I'm the interim director for the National Blues Museum. I'm a professor at the Webster University, and I run the National Black Radio Hall of Fame and the Wolf Jazz Institute at Harris Stowe State University. I'm a columnist for the St. Louis American newspaper, and I've been in this business for a long time.
I'm Uvee Hayes, and actually I've played two roles most of my adult life as an educator with the city public schools here in St. Louis as a school psychologist. Been doing that for 40 years. Also, I'm a professional recording artist and have been doing that for many years, most of my adult years. And I'm a mother, a wife.
Yeah.
Just love entertaining and have been in it for a long time.
Yeah. And thank you for that, of course. I was thinking when you were talking about your credentials, and I see the scroll laying out, all of the letters behind your name and all of the accolades and like the long list of things. Tell us about that. You said you came back to St. Louis in '65?
Yes.
From California?
Yeah, but I'm from Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah, so I went to California in '64 at KSOL Radio. It used to be KSAN, and they changed the format to a black format and became KSOL. And with me was Sly Stone. Sly Stone was one of our disc jockeys, and Herb Campbell and so forth. And we changed the format, and we became the #1 station in the Bay Area. Our competitor was KDIA in Oakland, California. But Johnny Rabbit, who was a big disc jockey here in St. Louis, Missouri, had gone to Oakland to KDIA, and he used to listen to me in the mornings on his way to work while I was already on the air. And when he left California to come back to St. Louis, he took a position at KATZ Radio, called himself Johnny American, and he decided to try to get me to come to St. Louis, knowing I was from Chicago. And I was very unhappy at KSOL. I was going to move to Los Angeles, and he asked me to come here. So I said, yeah, I'll come there for 1 year. And I'm 56 now.
Yeah.
And I started out in Mississippi. I'm originally from the state of Mississippi, Macon, Mississippi. That's where I started my career singing. Also, I attended the University of Mississippi Valley State University, and then went over to Mississippi State in Starksville, Mississippi. So most of my educational background did come from the state of Mississippi. And then after I got here, certifications came into play at SIU, Webster, and places like that. And this guy here I met at the radio station, because at the time I was kind of looking for a producer, type thing to keep it moving.
Yeah.
So that's how we kind of.
You said if you want to get on the air.
She never mentions that she was one of the first African Americans to receive a master's degree from Mississippi State University.
Bring it, yeah.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that. So tell us about the sounds of the city. What were you hearing? What was on the radio, and did you have a hand in to bringing forth, things that weren't heard, or were things new to you?
In the mid-'60s, as you perhaps remember, Motown was just starting, but people still thought that they were the crossover medium, but they were not. See, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, all these people were crossover artists long before the soul, sound of soul. And when the soul music started crossing over, we still weren't being played, the African American artists. There was Stax, and there was Atlantic, and there were some other independent labels who kind of took advantage of what was happening with Motown. But yet and still, the African American artists weren't getting fair play, not until the mid to late 70s.
Even on radio, this wasn't about just marketing the product, you know, what you see on the album covers or anything. They were still blocking radio waves from having these.
They were. You hear these wonderful commercials now with Howlin' Wolf and James Brown.
Yeah.
But that was not the case in the 60s.
Yeah.
That was not the case in the late 70s sometimes. And when MTV came about, they wouldn't even play artists.
Right.
Artists. So it's been a rough struggle.
Yeah.
You know, they make it sound so rosy now, like everything was really wonderful. But it was terrible. It was iconic. It was draconic, draconian. You know, it was terrible. It was bad.
Yeah.
And may I interject,
Sure.
Bernie, isn't this also connected to the time period of the race, you know, records, you know? Even when you think about its connection with films identified as race films, okay?
Yeah.
So that kind of segregation continued on through the 60s and 70s in a
Late
sense.
70s.
Yeah.
Yeah, late 70s. And the black artists were considered race records. Memphis Minnie and all these different people, you know. When you take a tour of the National Blues Museum, you see all these wonderful artists who were recording, black artists who were recording back in the 20s and the 30s, but they weren't getting play on what they call major media. Major media that the black artists never did were used on white radio. As simple as that. And it's nothing that most people don't know about, but they seem to write those stories out of the history books.
That's why we're here
Write them
today.
out, they actually don't write them in.
Right. Yeah. Those omissions, just skipping over it, and it's not for, you know, these artists saying, "Hey, we're here." You know, were they stifled? Of course they were. You know, we know that civil rights movements and being beaten back with hoses and arrests and murders and things like that. Could you talk about those times, especially those threatening times? Was it how dangerous was it for even to be a personality, to be a performer, to be on radio, and was it a point like, you know?
Well, my wife is from Mississippi. It was just dangerous being black.
Yeah, yeah.
You know. And you were with a band in Mississippi, and you guys used to travel a lot.
Yeah. I did. When I was in college, I took on jobs, and we kind of played around the city, you know, to make meal tickets, you know, and that kind of thing on campus. And we were really not allowed, didn't get any kind of opportunity as far as playing for a white audience. I think we might have done it maybe one time or something like that, but it was always just the local clubs around the city or something like that. We were never really allowed to go into the white clubs.
You mentioned the Chitlin Circuit earlier. The Chitlin Circuit is still in
Still a
right
thing.
now today.
Yeah.
But there were so many people who missed so many opportunities, who had so much talent that's never heard.
Yeah.
It's still not heard and still not fair. It's still, payola still is live and well. And that was a way that you had to pay to get your recordings on the radio. And that's still happening today.
Yeah.
Although it's people are not talking about it that much. And the FCC did crack down on a lot of that in the 60s, 50s and the 60s. But another thing too is talk about the race records and so forth. You see the term rock and roll.
Yep. Boogie woogie, rock and roll.
Yeah, there was no rock and roll. We didn't consider anything rock and roll, the R&B. We were soul artists,
Right.
you know, and blues artists. And no one distinguished the blues from soul or rock and roll. If you were Johnny Taylor, some people consider him a rock and roll artist. Some people consider him a soul artist. Some people consider him a blues artist.
Right.
I mean, they separate the genres, but they crossed all these different lines.
Yeah.
the people who wrote the books and writing the books now, not only doing it to exploit a lot of these people, and it's all for money, but they also keep them in certain genres and certain categories where they can't expand to their full capacity.
Right. So from this, going from, well, I was thinking as you were talking about this, the Chitlin Circuit, I was surprised to know how many people still don't know what that was or never even heard the term. Could you talk about its, the distance that it stretched? I know it went from, deep south up to through the eastern seaboard, maybe up into New York and whatnot, and maybe to a further extent.
Well, the Chitlin Circuit was any place that an African American could play.
Right. Yeah. For food mostly,
Alan
or
Freed termed term rock and roll out of R&B, but any R&B artist, any black artist who was touring the South or the North or the East or the West, there were only certain clubs they could play. That was the Chitlin Circuit.
Right. Yeah.
Including Lou Rawls made a record about it. I mean, even Lou Rawls, not King Cole, couldn't play but certain areas and certain clubs. And if they did play certain clubs, they had to come in the back. Las Vegas was terrible for that.
Right. Yeah.
Lots of people, your biggest stars, Nat King Cole, Duke Ellington, Count Basie.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
They would play the big rooms, but they couldn't eat in the hotels and they couldn't stay in the hotels. That's the Chitlin Circuit.
Right. It's amazing the depth of talent that was there, that really was the backbone of it. That Jimi Hendrix, Little Richard, Isley Brothers, names go on and on through there, and this is how they came up. This is how they learned. This is how they survived. The birth of rock and roll. Let's kind of go into that.
Alan Freed called it rock and roll.
Yeah. Okay.
It was soul music. It was music to us.
Right.
He termed it rock and roll because of the fact that he had a national television show going. Actually, he was the Moondog in Cleveland, but then he moved to New York, and he found out this wonderful treasure about black people writing music and selling music.
Yeah.
So he turned it to rock and roll, and the way he can also integrate that into the white market.
Right.
See, and,
Yeah.
So it's all about marketing.
It was all about marketing. It was all
and
about
that's the
money.
business side.
Yeah, and
being able to cross over,
Right.
more money.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Alan Freed would, in order for the black artists to perform on his program and to be recognized and seen for the visibility, he would say he wrote the songs. He would take the publishing and the musical rights
Yeah.
for all the mechanical rights. So they would perform on this program, but they wouldn't get any benefit from it. So that's why they had to rely on the Chitlin Circuit in order to make money.
Right. Alan Freed presents
Yeah.
this, and he's the one that signed the papers.
He's
right.
always getting all the money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
robbery.
A name comes to mind, right?
Yeah, Robert. It was legitimized.
Yeah, that was legitimized, right? So a name comes to mind, Sister Rosetta Tharpe. If it weren't for her and her style of play on the guitar, the electric guitar, none of this would sound the way it does anyway. Could you talk about how maybe what you know about her and her influence and
Well,
where it
she
maybe
was a
spread?
gospel recording artist. Rosetta Tharpe was playing the guitar. And at the time, that doubles music thing came about, you know?
Yeah.
And so she was ostracized from certain churches and so forth, but her talent, she just couldn't subdue it.
Right.
And so she played gospel. She also played blues. She also played rock and roll. She was a virtuoso.
Yeah.
She was a wonderful, wonderful person, and she never received her rewards either.
Right.
But she wasn't limited to one category. Her sister Rosetta Tharpe was a genius, and other people followed her and stole her chords.
Yes. Right.
Can I jump in?
Sure. Absolutely.
and duplicated what she was doing.
What's your all feeling about then the role of not just the female but also the guitarist, in this whole history of, blues, gospel, and what has been marketed as rock and roll?
Like, what is she?
Yeah, it's not just Rosetta Tharpe, but I'm saying that are there other, females and other guitarists, that you can think of? Because it seems like the guitar itself has been the instrument
Yeah.
that connects. If that makes any sense.
Sure.
This.
Well, Jimi Hendrix,
Okay.
you know, was a rock and roll, R&B, a soul guitarist, a blues guitarist actually, and he evolved with his own style and his own gimmicks, you know, by burning the guitar and playing with his teeth and so forth. But he was a pure rock and roll or soul or blues guitarist. He was with some of the wonderful groups. He played with Chuck Berry, I think, for a minute. And he played with other groups. He played with the Falcons and other soul groups. And Jimmy just evolved. But that was the connection, that whole string of people listening to him and following him. And you talk about the British invasion. That was
Right.
another farce and a hoax.
That's go, please.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
I don't want us to get away from the devil's music.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Rosetta Tharpe.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of artists coming up, you know, back in the day, they had a really hard time, not only with the other race, but with our own race.
Right.
They just could not accept it. It was a mental thing, you know, about the devil's music. If you were a guitarist, if you were singing the blues, it was the devil's music. And the community didn't support, you know, black artists like they should have, because the mentality, they were just so into devil's music. I know the story about Howlin' Wolf. He was from my hometown.
Okay.
And his family, you know, when he made it famous, he went home to his mother and he offered her money and she refused it. She said no, not from devil's music. You know, this was a society thing and it was really bad. So, you know, we had to overcome a lot. There was a lot going.
Do you think since it was in the black community, since it was recognized or thought of as devil's music, do you think it was that made it easier for black folks to let it go, let that music go ahead and say be stolen, quote unquote, you know, like, well, you know, y'all shouldn't do it, we're not going to listen to it, and then somebody took the ball and ran with it? Do you think that might have helped?
It did have something to do with it.
Yeah.
Really. We as black people, even now, doesn't show appreciation for the blues like we really should.
Right.
You
And
know,
more protective of it.
sometimes if you see the other audience enjoying it, then we'll look around and say, oh, okay, well, maybe there is something to this, you know? But yeah, I think it really has.
And different parts of the country too. You know, soul music, black music, blues music. Some people, some African Americans thought they were too sophisticated
Yes.
to
Yeah.
listen to that music. They much rather listen to Miles,
Right.
to jazz, or Jimmy Lunsford, John Coltrane, those type artists, and Louis Armstrong. You know, they would say they're jazz enthusiasts.
Yeah.
But yet still they go home and listen to the Spaniels.
Yeah, I remember I sat in there. So Tuesday nights in this club in Illinois, Stagger Inn, they used to have a jazz night on Tuesdays, and I was invited by a friend. His name's Scooter. I don't even think I ever learned his real name. He was a guitar player, and he invited me, and I went and I took a few effects pedals. So I was the Jimi Hendrix that day. And I remember I played, I sat in, I thought I was doing a great job. Everything sounded really cool. And at the end of the night, he came over and said, look, man, they don't want you back. And I said, why? What's the problem? He said, well, they're kind of purist, and with your effects pedals, it was a little too much for them. You know, you were saying, you know, that sophistication, like, is it kind of a sort of a shooting yourself in the foot kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
It's cultural, and also a lot of folks don't think that they would be listening to this blues or rock and roll music or soul music and so forth. Yet and still, it all comes from the belly of the slave ship. It all came from the same place.
Right.
You know, like Mavis and the Staple Singers, they would get on stage and says, robot pop Staples. he's playing the blues.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Although they were singing gospel songs.
Yep.
And but that's where it comes from. It depends on what you're doing,
Yeah.
you know, and how you're doing it, what demographic you're after. But
Yeah.
it's
Sure.
it's pretty good. The focus of a lot of our attention in the music industry and in the music genre is crossover. And they says if you don't please the major markets, you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
Right.
They had some black artists on Columbia, on CBS Records, on Columbia Records, and Atlantic Records. The black artists on RCA Records and the majors, who didn't want to be considered black artists. They didn't want to be on the black labels. MCA Records, I was with MCA Records at the time, and some of the artists didn't want to be in the black music division. They wanted to be in the pop music division because they would get more exposure. And that was a terrible thing because they were totally whitewashed. Their mind was just totally gone, thinking black folks couldn't support them. But they were. And all their support came from black radio. All their support came from black artists. All their support came from black supporters. But when they got to a certain degree, certain strata, they forget about the black artists and concentrate strictly on pop.
Can I interject? Because I want to go back to how important it was for female, artists, as musicians, as performers, and especially black female, artists. And I'm looking at you, Uvee, because this, that piece of the music history is another piece that tends to be left out. And how that, part is so important too, because you look at, even somebody like Aretha Franklin, you see what I'm saying? I mean, her contribution, but again, some of that's being told, even now with some of the films coming out about her now, still is being told from a very different perspective than, perhaps you as a black female, what it's like. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so we talked about Sister Rosetta's Tharpe, but what about the other female?
Let me tell you, Uvee and I was driving to hometown, Mississippi, and we picked up WDIA out of Memphis, Tennessee, 40 miles outside of Memphis, and we listened to WDIA all the way through Memphis until 40 miles on the other side of Memphis, in Whale of the Mississippi. We heard 2 female artists.
The entire time.
The entire
That's
time.
how many hours of driving?
Yeah, so about 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
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 at least more than 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, but of all that we were listening to Rufus and we were listening to the other people on WDIA, 2 female artists in all that time.
Yeah.
2.
There are certainly, and I'd love for you to expand on that, Uvee, too, but there are certainly women artists. Brittany Howard of a band called Alabama Shakes, she comes to mind. Lizzo, she's another recording artist, gigantic name in the pop and rock industry, and several others. Talk about those, the struggles to be heard. Of course, equality there's a different, that comes with a different air today. It's more on the tips of everybody's tongue. More people are speaking out. How difficult was it to even get the gig in the first place?
Listen, if you were not in a band that had male singers up front, there was no gig.
Right.
Not for me, just as a lady. Most of my career, I've always been kind of maybe in the shadow.
Yeah.
In order to get the gigs. Even the producers talk up front, for me to get the gigs. And getting airplay, it was extremely hard. Like Bernie was saying, it's just something about playing female artists. I don't know what the thought is. Most of the disc jockeys, the radio personalities, they are males. And for some reason, mentally, they just think that the male is a stronger, dominant singer.
Smarter.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So they just don't concentrate a lot on female vocalists. I've gone to radio stations and took the music there and tried to have conversation, you know, when you could just walk in.
Yeah.
And they just didn't have time. They didn't have time for me.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a male thing
Yeah.
back in the day.
And it's not conscious. They don't actually realize that they're not giving the female artists fair play. They really don't realize that because
Right.
they have so many different males that are bringing out with music and bands and so forth. They don't even consider, am I not giving this female artist
Right.
the recognition? But I mean, there's Aretha and there's Roberta Flack and so forth.
Yeah, that
But
can
you've
get
got to
through.
be a million seller,
Yeah.
you know, in
Yeah.
order to get any kind of airplay. But
Yeah.
for those coming up, those people who are just trying to make it through the industry, unless you go through the payola side of it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you very
Pay to
seldom
play.
can recognize. And even after you pay some of these disc jockeys to play your music, they won't play it right and they won't concentrate on it.
Yeah.
Just
the
tell
way
you that they played it.
the
Yeah.
way to make a hit record, and no one knows what a hit record is going to be. No one can tell you what this is a hit or it's not going to be a hit. But it's called repetition. You
Yeah.
have to hear a song record over and over again. In order, if you don't even like it at first, you begin to like it.
Yeah.
But if it's a great record and you start hearing it over and over again, it'll become a big hit
Right.
and it'll sell. Yeah.
Then people
be
have to
rewarded.
internalize it
Yeah.
Certainly.
and really connect to it that way. Yeah.
Tell you a little story. WVON in Chicago. I'm sorry, WYNR in Chicago. The Clintons had just bought out WVON, and we played a record, but it was the worst record that was ever made. The most horriblest sounding record that you would ever think about. And we played that over and over and over and over again. It was the only record we played for like 3 days straight. It was driving people crazy, and all of a sudden people going to the record stores trying to buy it.
You just feed it to them, and no, this is what you like. No,
Repetition.
listen to this. Yeah,
Certainly.
yeah. It seems that certainly these station directors weren't seeking any other voices, female voices, or they weren't looking for it. It just had to fall in their lap, And even if you came, like you said, you handed it to them, like, here, play this, please, And they, sure, we'll get to it. It goes in some drawer or the bin out in the alley or something. But
And there were female bands back in the 40s and the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
They made these little videos in short, but they never got the recognition as the male bands. And they
Right.
were tremendous artists. They were blowing trumpets and saxophones and flutes and playing guitar and pianos and everything else. And they really complete female orchestras.
yeah,
But they never did get the recognition that the males. Never. Only because of the gender.
yeah, right. Patriarchal society, and
Precisely.
daddy gets a big piece of chicken, as Chris Rock says,
And they stink, don't they?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I want to make this a transition point and get our next guests up here too.
I don't want to leave.
This is, like I said, this is the first.
Okay.
This is the first bit of
He's just kidding.
many. We've got lots of. I want to get hours of footage if I can.
Yeah,
But,
that's so much history back there.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah, this
Thank you
is.
for the invite.
Thank you so much. And with my partner here, Dr. Roz Norman,
Both of you. Appreciate
St.
you
Louis
both.
Blues Society. Thank you so much. Yeah.